Yo, what's happening, guys? It is GM Cody back with another video this week. And this week we are going back to 50 years of D&D, and we were taking a look at one of the games and one of the ideas that inspired the original Dungeons and Dragons, and that is Chainmail, the war game rules for medieval miniatures, written by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin. So yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Now, I don't own a physical copy of Chainmail. Unfortunately, I need to remedy that. Now that it's printed on demand, I'll probably go that option, because an old copy of Chainmail right now is quite expensive. So anyways, I don't have anything to hold up for you guys like I usually do. But I do have several PDF copies of Chainmail, and the version we're going to be looking at tonight is the second edition of Chainmail. And the reason I want to look at the second edition is because it is different than the third edition, which the first and second edition were produced by Guidon Games, and the third edition and on was printed by TSR. Now, one reason for this is because the PDF for the second edition is a much cleaner copy and easier to read. So that's the main reason. And there are some changes, but not major changes. And the big change, which is the wizards in the fantasy supplement, I'm going to bring up the third edition so we can take a look at that as well. That one major change. Any other changes are probably pretty minor and just grammatical or whatever. So without further ado, let us get into this. So here we are, Chainmail, Rules for Medieval Miniatures by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin. This is the second edition by Guidon Games, Wargaming with Miniatures. And I should have said, I was talking about maybe doing a two-parter here on Chainmail, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do, to be honest with you. So tonight we're just going to observe this game for what it is. I will bring up some stuff that's D&D related, but really what we're looking at is just Chainmail for what it is. We're looking at Chainmail as it's presented here as a miniatures war game for fighting medieval battles, and not so much as a D&D reference, right? Now, I might do another video and we'll go back and look at all the references that the original D&D makes to Chainmail, as well as discussing how you can use Chainmail when playing original D&D, and how there's a couple different thought processes about that, and we'll go into that. But tonight we're just looking at the rules of Chainmail and discussing Chainmail, and of course we will, we'll be talking about the influences it had on D&D, as well as Dave Arneson's games, apparently. So this is the second edition, came out in 1972. The first edition came out in 1971. Donald Lowry. Now, Donald Lowry also apparently did the illustrations, which are quite good, actually. They're really quite cool. I like the illustrations in this. And here we can see a classic 1970s sand table here. It's in black and white, so it's kind of hard to tell, but it's played on a classic sand table with, it looks like, plastic elastomeric miniatures, which is what Gary Gygax used, and a lot of these guys used back in the 70s for medieval wargaming. And these were plastic pre-painted figures that you could order. I don't remember where they came out of. They might have came out of Europe, probably somewhere in Europe, and were probably not cheap back then. And I'm not sure where these pictures were taken. This might be on Gary Gygax's sand table, and if you guys know, let me know. It doesn't really, I don't think it references who took these pictures or where they were taken, but I would imagine that this is Gary's collection and this might be Gary's basement. Of course, it could be the other way around. It might be Jeff Perrin's stuff. I don't know. Introduction, it's just giving you an introduction of what this game's all about, that it's a medieval miniatures war game, that you should play it on a 4-foot by 7-foot table, which is a bit odd. You could also play on the floor, as it says, and it's, telling you different ways. You could use a sand table, or you could actually cut out pieces of masonite or plywood and make your own battlefield terrain, and it kind of gives you an idea, the scope of the game and everything like that. And here we get into the actual rules. So there is a figure ratio, of course. They recommend using 40 millimeter miniatures, and that's because probably the elastilin figures, like we were talking about, were 40 millimeters. But they also mention Airfix, which Airfix figures and hobby and model kits were very popular at the time, especially for wargamers, and they were true 25 millimeter scale, which nowadays we would actually call them 20 millimeter, but back then they were true 25 millimeter scale, and they're plastic figures. And I don't think you can get any Airfix figures anymore. I actually have some Airfix figures over there somewhere that I bought when I was a kid. Now, there is a figure ratio, of course, because this, what proper old school 1970s war game wouldn't have a ratio. The ratio of figures to men assume 1 to 20, so for every one figure represents 20 men, and the ground scale is 1 inch equals 10 yards. And 1 turn to play is roughly equivalent to 1 minute of battle in time in battle. The troop ratio will hold true for 30 millimeter figures, but if smaller scale is used, it should be reduced to 1 to 10. Here is the turn sequence. Now there's 2 different types of turn sequences. So you have alternate turn sequence, I go, you go, the classic thing, or simultaneous turns, movement. So in the standard game, both players roll die. The side with the highest score has the chance of electing to move first or last. The side that moves first moves his figures and makes any split moves and missile fire, taking any pass-through fire possible at the time. Number 3, the side that has last move now moves his figures and makes any split move fire and missile fire, taking any pass, blah, blah, blah. Number 4, artillery fire. Number 5, missile fire. Number 6, melees are resolved. Number 7, steps 1 through 6 are repeated throughout the remainder of the game. Note, missile fire from split moving troops is considered to take effect immediately during the movement portion of this turn, and the same is true of pass-through fire. All other fire, both artillery missiles, considered to be simultaneously take effect just prior to melee resolution. Now, the simultaneous system is basically the same, except you write down your orders for your troops, you reveal your orders, then you make your moves simultaneously. It's mentioning here morale checks are not indicated in either of the 2 systems, and that's because morale checks are taken whenever they occur, and that could occur during the fire or melee portion of a turn. So now we get into terrain. Of course, terrain slows you down. Hill slow you down by 50%, prevents all charge moves, but movement downhill is at normal speed. Wooded as hill, but with the additional penalty of preventing the movement of formed bodies of troops. Marshy as hill with the additional penalty of preventing the entrance of heavy equipment, catapults and guns. And rough prevents all charge moves. Ditch and rampart as hill. River and stream treat individually as to fordability. Penalty for crossing, and so on. There is a lot of errors in here, I'm already noticing. So that's probably most of the stuff that was fixed in later editions. A lot of typographical errors. A typical stream would require 6 inches to cross and prevent charge moves, while a typical river would require troops to halt before and after crossing the entire move to cross. Terrain selection. They have a system here where you can come up with a random terrain selection, and you take 3x5 index cards and write all these different types of terrain on them, and you draw up to 4 times, and then you place those on the table to determine your battlefield, which is a good system. It's pretty cool. Movement. Here's the movement in inches, of course, and for all the different types of troop, their regular movement, their bonus for moving on a road, their charge movement if they're charging, and their missile range if they have any missile weapons. And so you've got different types of troops here: armored foot, heavy foot, Landschnick, Swiss pikemen, lightfoot archers, arquebusiers, crossbowmen, longbowmen, Turk archers, heavy crossbowmen, heavy horse, medium horse, light horse, catapults and cannons, and wagons. So far you're not seeing any fantasy stuff, and you won't until the very end. There's a separate section just for the fantasy stuff that we'll get into when we get towards the end. Right now we're just dealing with actual historical units, pretty much. Units must pay a movement penalty in order to change their formation and or facing. So to change into different formations, most of them take up 1 move, except to form into a line or square, it takes 2 moves. Facing also, if you change your facing, it also costs a certain amount of movement. Fatigue. So this is a really interesting mechanic in this game. I think it's a cool idea. It seems a little clunky to actually implement, but I think it's a cool idea. And last time I've actually played Chainmail a few times, and last time we played, we used the fatigue rules, but I simplified them. So I don't remember how I simplified them, but I just made it a simple thing. But I think it's a cool system to actually have fatigue. So you can gain fatigue by, moving a certain amount of consecutive turns or meleeing long enough. If you meet any of these criteria, you're fatigued. When you're fatigued, you attack at the next lower value, so heavy foot equals light foot, and this is how you determine how heavy you hit, basically, in Chainmail. We'll look at that at the combat charts when we get to the very end. They defend at the next lower value, and their morale value drops to -1 on values and die rolls. Movement uphill equals 2 normal moves per uphill move. 1 turn of non-movement fully restores fatigued troops. So I think the fatigue thing's cool. I think if I played it nowadays, were to actually play Chainmail, and I definitely would still play Chainmail, I would probably simplify this. But I think it's a cool idea to have fatigue in a game system. And I really can't think of any other. I'm sure there were many game systems, especially back then in the 70s, that had fatigue systems, but this is the only one I can think of off the top of my head that had a fatigue system, and I think it's cool. Missile fire. This is how you perform missile fire. So you look at however many number of figures you have firing. You look at the type of armor that your opponent's wearing. You roll a die, and then you cross-reference the chart, and that'll tell you how many dead men you have. There's no saving throws. None of that crap. You just roll once, see how many figures you had, compare it against their armor, tells you how many men die. Rate of fire. Now, you can fire multiple times per turn depending on the type of archer you are, either crossbowmen, archers, or longbowmen. And you may potentially be able to fire twice depending as well at the end of your turn. Split move and fire. So this is something horsemen, like, light horse archers like Mongolians or whatever could do. So you could actually move and then fire in the middle of your movement and then continue moving, which is very cool. And the elves have this as well when we'll look at the into the fantasy portion. Pass-through fire. Stationary missile troops may elect to give pass-through fire to any enemy units which are within their missile range at the half-move portion of the turn. This would include any enemy troops split-moving, passing by, or charging the missile troops. So that's kind of cool. So you can stand and fire if somebody, moves past you. Number of ranks permitted to fire, 2 ranks. Indirect fire. Any archers except for crossbowmen might fire over the heads of intervening troops, friendly or any enemy, providing they are more than 3 inches away. It does reduce the range by 1/3. Indirect fire automatically classifies the target in the next higher armor category. So yeah, cover gives you a bonus, of course. If indirect fire is blah blah blah, will reduce missile casualties by half. Throwing axes and spears, you can do that too, and that's cool. So yeah, for like Vikings and Romans and such, if you're this is a little later for Romans, but Vikings, might have that, and some Dark Ages units. Catapult fire. So catapult fire kind of works in a strange way. So it kind of works like you would see in Warhammer. So you guess the range from your catapult, and then you do this triangulation kind of thing here, and that tells you how far off the missile hits. Now there's an optional thing which I actually like better, is you roll 2 different colored dice. One is for overshoot and the other is for undershoot. You subtract those dice. You take the higher of the two, you subtract the highest from the lowest. That tells you how many inches it goes over or under your target. And I got some ad here. Okay. So I like that system better than the triangulation thing here. It's kind of weird. Arquebusers, they just kill any figure they hit. When firing, arquebusers roll an accuracy die for each man and use the following table to hit. So you look at the range and the roll, the score, and any scores to hit, kill their target. So that's quite powerful, actually. It doesn't even really matter what their armor is. Cannons kind of work the same way as the catapults. You have to guess the range, but you put a dowel at the end of the cannon. You measure from that, and then you have another dowel that's marked off in like this, in like 6 inches, and then you place that on your target, and then you roll a d6, and you go along that dowel at the end of your target to see where the cannonball landed or bounced or whatever, and that's what it hits. And then each type of cannon actually has a different diameter dowel. So kind of an interesting system for cannons. Charging works a little bit oddly in this. Well, not really. It doesn't work that oddly. So you at the beginning of your move, you're able to charge. You can charge. You move at your charge rate. You can curve up to 45 degrees. If you charge and you melee, but you didn't finish your charge move, after you melee and you're victorious, that charging unit can continue their charge move afterwards. So melees, which we'll look at, I think we'll look at it right now, actually. So the way this works is it's simultaneous, I believe, and you look at the combat tables here, which we're about to look at. So the combat table here, what you do is you look at what type of unit you are, what class of unit you have. So you say you're heavy foot, you look at heavy foot versus light foot. So you would roll 1 die per every figure you have, and a 5 or 6 kills is what you get to kill. Again, there's no saving throw or anything like that. And that's how combat works. Now, at the end of combat, what happens is, let me get this back. I should have had the other one open to the combat tables if I was smart. So what happens is you have to take a post-melee morale. Now this is probably the most complicated part of this game system. It's not really that complicated, but it takes a little bit of time and math to figure out. And last time I played, there was actually a program I found, which I don't think it's around anymore, to figure out post-melee morale and chainmail. And I'm not going to go through the whole system, but essentially you have to multiply by a morale factor and, you know, number you lost, difference or whatever. Then you look at that difference and it tells you what happens if you lost. So either, you know, the melee will continue, you'll be pushed back half a move, push back 1 move, retreat, rout, or surrender. I think it's a little bit clunky by today's standards. I mean, we definitely have. I've played Chainmail multiple times. We've played with this system. It works fine. It just takes a little bit of figuring. Having a calculator handy definitely helps. It's not necessarily hard. It's just a little bit. It's a little bit clunky. And to be honest with you, if I played Chainmail on a regular basis, it's something I would probably look at house ruling. Even though I really do like the idea of you know, post melee morale having different effects, which is very similar to, actually reminded me of Black Powder, which me and my buddy Andrew have been playing a lot as we've been playing our Dunderland War campaign, and it has a very similar kind of morale system. So I really do like that morale effect table. Now you also have another, you also take morale if you lose a certain amount of troops based on however many casualties you lost, based on what type of unit you are. So it's not only do you have to take a post-melee morale, but if you took a certain amount of casualties, then you have to take another morale, and that could come from melee or shooting. So anyways, there's 2 different types of morale. There's post-melee morale and there's regular morale. There is also optional rules here for taking prisoners, which is really cool. It's something I haven't really seen before. Of course, you know, a lot of rule sets today would abstract those kind of things, so you just don't see that very much anymore. Again, back then you probably would have saw it. Morale, like we were talking about. Here's historical characteristics. So there's different kind of special rules here for different types of historical units. So you have rules for knights and peasants that have their own special rules, mercenaries, and these are all really cool, right? Like the knights are impetuous, and the peasants are unwilling warriors, and you have to roll to see if they will even do anything every turn. Mercenaries, you have to see if they will obey orders, or they might demand, they might not do anything because they need more pay, or they're on strike or something, or they've been bribed, which is really cool. English longbowmen have special rules. Scots infantry, because they can do the skiltrons and stuff like that. The Saracens, because the Saracens have short bows as well as melee weapons. Army commanders, of course, give you a bonus to your dice for morale, I believe, to any die within 12 inches of the army commander. Baggage trains, they have rules for baggage trains, which is cool. Weather, here's some weather rules, which is always good to see in a war game. I do love me some weather rules. Sieges. So there is siege rules in here, and different types. These are point values for different types of walls and towers and gatehouses and such. Weapon attack values, the amount of damage they deal to the walls and such. You have bombards and siege towers and rams, ladders, boiling oil, rocks, mining, so you can actually mine under the walls, breaches, and all that stuff. So there is a little bit of rules here for siege, doing siege warfare, which is really cool. Man-to-man combat, so if you don't want to do the 1 to 20 or 1 to 10 scale ratio per man, you can do man-to-man combat. Now, this is one of the systems that is recommended in Dungeons & Dragons as well. So I'm just briefly going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about how you can use it yet with Dungeons & Dragons, because it's a little more complicated than that. But this is one of the ways. And man-to-man is every figure represents one figure. Now, the rules for the man-to-man system and the mass combat system are not much different. There are a few little differences here. There is actually like initiative order, which this works really well for D&D, obviously, and this is what they recommend you use in original D&D. And different types of classes of weapons matter too, because if you have a better class of weapon, a longer weapon, basically longer reach weapon, then you have an advantage over your opponent. And it also uses a different combat table. So if we look here, this is the man-to-man combat table, which is very different than the mass combat table. So the man-to-man melee combat table, you roll 2 6-sided dice, you consult your weapon, and you consult their armor, and this will tell you the roll you need to score on 2 dice to hit. Same here with missile fire, and this is dependent on range too, so that's why it has 3 numbers here. It just depends on short range, medium range, and long range. Very cool system. I've also used this with D&D, and we're not going to go into full details about that yet, but this is the man-to-man combat system that they're talking about in original D&D that we looked at last time. So back up here, let's see where we're at here. So yeah, the next thing is in here is the jousting rules. So there is a full rules for jousting in here. Now, who was it? Somebody just did a really good video. I can't, damn it, I can't remember now who did this video. I'm going to look real fast, just because I want to give you guys the right information. And I'm going to link, I'm actually going to link this guy's, I'll probably link this guy's video in the description. And most of you guys might already know, because it's a pretty popular miniatures wargaming channel on YouTube. But he did a chainmail joust, and it was Oldhammer. Yeah, Oldhammer, which dude does great content. He does great videos, but I think it's him and his wife do a lot of videos together, and him and his wife did a chainmail joust with old school Warhammer figures, and it was very cool. Go check that out. I'll leave a link down below so you can actually see how the jousting rules work, other than me just talking about it. But essentially, again, there's a jousting matrix here. Which, by the way, I am a fan of charts and stuff when they're like this. I don't know why everybody's so opposed to charts nowadays, but anyways, it's pretty easy. You just pick an aiming point. You pick where your shield is located, then you cross-reference, and you get a result. And that's simple as that, right? It's a very simple, elegant system, and it's very cool. And again, if you want to see it in action, go check out Old Hammer's channel and look at his chainmail chainmail jousting tournament he did with his wife. Then we have point values for different types of troops. Now, if I remember right, the point values here do not line up so well when compared to the point values for the fantasy troops. I could be wrong about that, but last time I was looking at this, they didn't line up so well. But, you know, who needs points anyways? You just kind of, you know, you balance things. It doesn't matter.
Hey, this is
And
Debbie
finally,
from
we get into the fantasy
Not a fan of advertising?
supplement.
Joining Mixcloud Premium
They go into
is
the different
easiest
figure
way
scale
to
again
disable
for
ads,
different types
listen without
of
limits,
creatures
and see
here.
track lists up
And
front
essentially,
before
this
listening.
really just
Go
uses
to
the mass
mixcloud.com/premium
combat
to subscribe.
system. It uses the same rules as Chainmail. It's not a different rule set. They just adjust the different types of races and creatures. They correspond on basically to different types of units, and they have their own special rules. So yeah. So like, you know, sprites can fly, and they suffered no casualties during the first round of melee. Surprise wears off, and the defender is able to blah blah blah. They can fly for 3 turns before landing, and they, you know, each unit has a different point value here and morale rating. And actually, now that I'm looking at the point values, it seems about right. You've got dwarves here, goblins, elves. The elves are very powerful, and it says so. You know, they can turn invisible, they can do split fire, and they get a bonus against fighting against different evil creatures like goblins, orcs, wizards, heroes, and superheroes. And of course, these are D&D
this
terms,
is Nico
right? And that's
from
where
Mixcloud.
these terms came from.
Have you tried our
Wights,
pro offering? It
lycanthropes,
lets you see
ogres,
full
balrogs,
stats on your
and giants.
uploads, including which cities people are
And I
listening
think they're
from,
armed with
for
magical
how long,
weapons too. They're just
schedule
extremely
uploads,
powerful.
and enable Mixcloud Select on your
And
profile.
a little undercosted probably for 4 points. Orcs, heroes, of course, superheroes, which are better than heroes, wizards, and wizards can cast spells. Now, this is one difference in the later editions that I actually like better. So wizards have a certain amount of spells depending on their level as wizard. And then I like the optional system, which is something I've used in D&D. Again, is the spell complexity that was introduced in the 3rd edition of Chainmail as an optional rule. And you look at the spell value, and you have to roll a certain number on 2d6 to cast the spell. So it either immediately takes effect, delayed until next turn, or it's negated. One or the other. I think this is a really cool system, and I would definitely use it for original D&D, and I have used it before. And they have some of the spells that would show up in D&D here, of course. They have Phantasmal Forces, Darkness, Wizard Light, Detection, Concealment, Conjuration of Elemental, Moving Terrain, and Protection from Evil. And I don't think... Now, the 3rd edition introduced some more spells here. They have Wizard Light, and that's probably because D&D had already came out, maybe, by this point, and they just added a lot of the D&D spells. But Levitate, Slowness, Haste, Polymorph, Confusion, Cloud Kill, and Anti-Magic Spell. And also, it does give rules in here for counter. You can do, you know, counter spells if there's another wizard. Race, of course, you've got race in here, lycanthropes, trolls, balrogs, giants, ints, dragons, and they're called ints in here. Rocks, elementals, basilisks, chimeras, giant spiders and insects, wights, and that's it. And then you do have magical weapons in here, like enchanted arrows, magical swords, and magic armor. And the 3rd edition's probably got more, I would assume. Let's see. No, same stuff. There is some additional rules here, you know, catapult fire versus all these different fantastic creatures, fantastic sieges, and of course the big creatures like Balrogs and ogres and giants and wizards. Elementals can knock down walls and stuff just like they can be used as, siege equipment essentially. And we get the alignment system here that was used in D&D, of course. Law, neutral, and chaos. And the different types of creatures and where they fall in that alignment system. And then, of course, there is a separate table for the fantasy supplement. So if we look here, well, it's not a separate table. It's just a reference table, really. It still uses the same table as the mass combat system. But every type of creature has their own special abilities, movement rate, charge range, flying, missile range, what they attack as, what class they attack as, such as Lightfoot, Heavyfoot, etc., and what they defend as. So you can look here, like a Hobbit moves 12 inches. Their special ability is A, which means they have the ability to become invisible. Hobbits only in brush or woods. And they have a missile range of 15 inches. And they attack as Lightfoot, and they defend as Lightfoot. You can see here, Orcs move 9. They have a special ability B. Ability to see in normal darkness as if it were light. They can charge 12 inches. They have a missile range of 15. They attack as Heavyfoot. They defend as Heavyfoot. So, not really any difference there. Just additional rules and stuff just to make them all a little bit different. And that, my friends, is pretty much Chainmail. So there you go. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this brief overview of Chainmail, looking at it for what it is, just a miniatures war game, and get an idea of how this game actually plays. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do a video, either probably on Tabletop Simulator, and actually play a game of Chainmail with somebody, because I do think it's still a pretty decent and playable game. It could use some tweaks here and there, like any old school war game system, and even guys back then fiddled around in house ruled with their rules, so I wouldn't feel ashamed to do so. But overall, I still think it's a pretty playable game and has some really cool ideas, if not a little bit clunky in some areas, and it could be cleaned up. But for the most part, I think it works quite well. And like I said, I've played several games of it and never had any problems. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Make sure to give me a thumbs up if you like the video. Always appreciated. And always appreciate the commentary too, even if I don't respond to it. I always read all the comments. So I really appreciate the support, guys, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.